The torches along the gravel drive guttered in the wind, and Marisette Holloway gripped the carriage door handle hard enough to feel the iron bite through her glove. The harvest ball at Caldermere House was already in full bloom inside. She could see it through the tall windows, gold light spilling onto the snow-dusted gravel, dark figures turning in patterns she had not been part of in 3 years. "Stop pulling at your gloves," her aunt said from the seat opposite. "You will tear them." "I am not pulling at them." "You are." Marisette folded her hands in her lap. The gloves were borrowed. So was the dress, pale dove silk edged in seed pearls, a touch too tight at the bodice and a touch too long at the hem. Her aunt had altered it twice and given up. "You will sit when you are not dancing," Lady Pembroke had said earlier. "You will smile politely. You will not, under any circumstance, sing." The carriage stopped. A footman opened the door. The cold rushed in like a slap. "Remember what I told you," her aunt murmured as they stepped down. 3 years is a long time, but memory in the ton is longer. Be small tonight. Be invisible. Let them remember the version of you that is easiest to forgive. That phrase landed in Marisette's chest the way few phrases ever had. She nodded, as she always nodded. Inside, the heat of the ballroom struck her like a second slap. This one welcome. Hundreds of candles burned in chandeliers above a polished floor. The orchestra was tuning between sets. The air smelled of beeswax, hothouse roses, and the faint metallic tang of wine. She had forgotten how loud crowds were when one had spent 3 years in a country house. Voices layered on voices, and silk hissed against silk as women turned. Her aunt steered her along the edge of the room. "Lady Caldermere first. Curtsy. Say nothing memorable. I am capable of a greeting." "You are capable of a great many things you should not do tonight." Marisette did not argue. Lady Caldermere was small and powdered and kind in the way that very rich women learn to be kind in public. She received Marisette with a polite inclination of her head and the smallest flicker of recognition behind her painted eyes. "Miss Holloway, how brave of your aunt to bring you out again. How brave of you to receive us, my lady." The flicker deepened. Her aunt's hand closed on Marisette's elbow, not hard, but with intent. They moved on. "What did I tell you about being memorable? That wasn't memorable. That was civil. It was a sentence with teeth in it. You used to be better at hiding the teeth. I'm out of practice." They found a place near a colonnade. Marisette accepted a glass of ratafia and did not drink it. Her aunt began a quiet conversation with a dowager about the price of muslin. Marisette let her gaze travel. She saw him before he saw her. The Duke of Vesperton stood across the ballroom near the western fireplace, half listening to a thin man speaking with the urgent gestures of a creditor. He was taller than the man, taller than most of the men in the room, and dressed with the kind of expensive plainness that announced rank more loudly than any embroidery. Dark coat, white linen, no jewelry except a signet ring that caught the candlelight when he turned his glass in his hand. His face was the face she remembered. Long, austere, unsmiling, with a faint downward set to the mouth that made him look perpetually unimpressed. She had been 17 the last time she stood in a room with Cassian Arden, a girl with a voice and a trembling hope, and he had been the friend of her brother home from the wars, and he had told her, in a corridor at Briar Hollow, on the night of her debut supper, that her singing was a useful accomplishment for a young woman of her station. Useful. She had carried the word for 3 years like a splinter she could not work loose. She did not realize she was staring until his head turned, and his eyes found hers across the room, and the faint downward set of his mouth deepened into something that was almost, but not quite, recognition. Marisette looked away first. She always looked away first. "What is it?" her aunt said. "Nothing." You went pale. "It is the heat. It is December. Then it is the cold." Her aunt followed her gaze. "Oh, yes. He is engaged, you know. Lady Henrietta Crewe, Earl of Mossbridge's daughter. Lady Caldemere is making the announcement tonight. That is the whole point of this ball." I did not know. You would, if you ever read the columns I leave in your morning room. I do not read those columns, because they are full of women I knew at 17, who now have 3 children, and I have a borrowed dress. Her aunt sighed. "Marisette, I will not embarrass you. That is not what I am worried about." The orchestra struck up the next set. Marisette let herself be led to a chair along the wall, and she sat with her hands in her lap and waited for the evening to pass over her like weather. She was good at this. She had spent 3 years being good at this. The art of being unmemorable was a discipline, and she had practiced it every day at her uncle's estate in the cold, flat country north of York, where the only audience for her voice had been the wind through the long meadow and a deaf piano teacher who had stopped correcting her in the 2nd month because he could no longer hear what was wrong. She refused to look at the western fireplace for an entire half-hour. She was congratulating herself on this small victory when a footman murmured to her aunt, "Forgive the intrusion, Lady Pembroke. Lady Caldemere is asking for you in the green drawing-room. Something to do with the announcement." Her aunt rose. "I will be a quarter of an hour. Do not move from this chair." "I will not move." "Marisette." "I will not move, aunt." Her aunt left. Then a young woman Marisette had never seen before sat down beside her in a rustle of apricot silk. "You are Miss Holloway, are you not? The one with the voice?" Marisette turned. The young woman was perhaps 19, with very fair hair and a face that had not yet learned to hide its eagerness. "My sister heard you sing once, at a private supper at Briar Hollow 3 years ago. She said you sang an air by Paisiello, and made our cousin Henrietta weep, which our cousin Henrietta has never done before or since, for any reason whatsoever. Will you sing tonight? Lady Caldemere always asks for music after the announcement." "I do not sing in public anymore." "Why ever not?" "Because a man told me my voice was useful. Because my brother died at Vittoria, and my father lost his mind by inches, and our money went with him. I'm out of practice," she said. "Oh, but surely." Beatrix. A new voice, cooler, older. A woman in deep green appeared behind the chair and laid a hand on the girl's shoulder. "You are pestering. Forgive my sister, Miss Holloway." The girl was led off, and Marisette sat very still and felt the splinter that had been buried in her chest for 3 years shift, just slightly, against the bone. Her aunt did not return. The orchestra finished its set. A footman in Caldemere livery stepped to the center of the room and lifted his hands for silence, and silence did not quite come, and Lady Caldemere herself crossed the ballroom toward a small dais near the south wall, and Marisette understood, with a slow, cold certainty, that this was the moment her aunt had wanted her seated and silent for. The contract. The match. The end of any small, foolish hope a girl with a borrowed dress had no business carrying. She rose from her chair. She did not entirely know why. The room was already noticing. She could feel heads turning along the colonnade as she crossed the floor, not toward the dais, but toward the alcove behind it, where she had seen the harpsichord standing closed. She reached the alcove. She laid one gloved hand on the harpsichord lid. She could feel his attention on her, like a hand at the back of her neck. Lady Caldemere on the dais cleared her throat to begin her announcement. Marisette opened the harpsichord lid. She had never needed accompaniment. She set her hand on the closed instrument only because she needed something to brace against, And then she lifted her chin, and she opened her mouth, and she did the one thing in the world her aunt had asked her not to do. She sang. The first note was quiet enough that only the people nearest the dais turned. The second was not. By the third note, the ballroom had gone still, in a way ballrooms almost never go still, the way a forest goes still before weather. And Lady Caldermere on the dais lowered the hand she had raised for her announcement, and didn't lift it again. Marisette could not have said afterward what she sang. She knew it was an air she had loved at 17 and had not let herself sing in 3 years. She knew it was in Italian, and about a woman who had been promised to one man and given to another, and had decided in the last verse that she would rather die than be sold. The words came up out of her like something she had swallowed and could no longer swallow. She sang the first verse to the harpsichord. She sang the second to the ceiling. She sang the third to the room. When she reached the last note, she held it longer than she should have, longer than was strictly correct, and she did not look at the western fireplace until the note had ended, and the silence after it had begun. And when she did look, because her body turned of its own accord, Cassian Ardennes was no longer at the western fireplace. He was halfway across the ballroom, stopped where he had stopped when she had begun the second verse, and his face wasn't unimpressed any longer. It was the face of a man who had been struck. The silence broke into applause, not the polite applause of a harvest ball, the applause of a room that did not know what else to do. Lady Caldermere on the dais was applauding. The musicians at the side were applauding. A dowager near the colonnade was openly weeping into a lace handkerchief and being attended to by 2 daughters. Marisette's aunt was nowhere in the room. Marisette stepped down from the alcove on legs that did not entirely belong to her. She did not look at Cassian again. She walked the length of the ballroom toward the doors at the far end, and the crowd parted for her the way crowds part for women they have decided, in the space of 3 minutes, to be either ruined or remarkable, and she could not yet tell which. She reached the doors and slipped through them into the cooler air of the corridor beyond. She had not made it 10 steps before her aunt found her, coming the other way from the green drawing room, with the look of a woman who had heard the applause and run. "What have you done?" Lady Pembroke's voice was low and white. "What have you done?" "I do not know. I left you for 1/4 of an hour. I do not know, aunt. I do not know why Lady Caldermere will never receive us again. Lady Mossbridge will not receive us. The Crews will not receive us. Do you understand what you have done? On the night of his announcement, in the alcove behind the dais? You may as well have stood on the dais yourself and— Lady Pembroke." The voice came from behind Marisette. Quiet. Controlled. She felt it more than she heard it. Her aunt's mouth closed mid-word, and her aunt's face, which had been the color of paper, became the color of paper held too close to a candle. "Your Grace," her aunt said. Marisette turned. Cassian Ardennes stood 3 paces away in the corridor, hat in hand, the candlelight from the wall sconces falling on one side of his face and leaving the other in shadow. The shadowed side made him look older than he was. The lit side made him look like the man she had stood with in a different corridor 3 years ago. "Lady Pembroke," he said again, "may I have a moment with your niece?" "Your Grace, I do not think— A moment. In your presence, of course. I will not detain her." Her aunt looked at Marisette. Marisette looked at the floor. Her aunt drew breath through her teeth. "1 moment, Your Grace. And then we are leaving." "Of course." He did not step closer. He did not have to. The corridor was narrow, and the candles were close, and Marisette could see, now that he was near, that his hand on the brim of his hat was not quite steady. "Miss Holloway, Your Grace, I owe you an apology for something I said 3 years ago." She had not expected that. She had expected a reproach, a polite dismissal, a request that she leave the house quietly. Not this. "I do not recall, Your Grace," she said, which was a lie, and a poor one, and they both knew it. "You recall, I called your singing useful. That was the word. Useful. I have thought of that word more often in the last 3 years than I would like to admit, and I have never been able to make it sit easily in my mouth, and tonight I understood why. Your Grace, I said the wrong word because I was a coward. The word I meant was the word I could not afford to say. I am saying it now, badly, in a corridor, at the worst possible time, because if I do not say it, now, I will not say it. And I have spent 3 years not saying it, and I will not spend another." Her aunt made a small sound behind her. Marisette could not breathe. "I cannot offer you anything tonight," he said. "I came out here to tell you that, and then to go back into that ballroom and do what I should have done 3 years ago, which is to break the engagement my father arranged for me before he died. I will be ruined for it. The crews will be furious. Half the room will not speak to me by Christmas. I am telling you now because I want you to know, before the announcement is canceled, that the cancellation is not a hope I am offering you. I have no right to offer you a hope. I am simply not going to stand on a dais tonight and promise myself to a woman I do not love after I have heard you sing." He bowed. He did not wait for a reply. He turned and walked back toward the ballroom doors and through them, and Marisette stood in the candlelit corridor, with her aunt's hand crushing her arm, and could not move and could not breathe, and could not, for a long moment, entirely exist. From inside the ballroom, a quarter-minute later, came a sound she had never heard before. The sound of a great many people drawing breath at once and forgetting to let it out. Then the silence broke. Voices rose like water against a dam, urgent, layered, and indistinct. A woman somewhere in the ballroom was crying. A man somewhere else was raising his voice in what sounded, even through the closed doors, like the beginnings of an argument. "Oh, heavens," her aunt whispered. "Oh, heaven help us, Marisette. What has he done? He has canceled it." "Yes, he has. He has canceled it on the dais in front of 300 people, and he has done it without telling me, and without telling you, and without telling, I imagine, anybody alive in that room, including the bride. We have to get out of this house. Now. We have to get out of this house before someone comes through that door looking for the woman whose music caused it. They will say I caused it. They will say a great deal worse than that. We are leaving." Her aunt's hand, still crushing her arm, began to drag her toward the side passage that led to the carriage drive. Marisette moved without resistance. Her own legs felt as though they belonged to a stranger. As they reached the turn in the corridor, a footman in Caldermere livery came around the other way, carrying a tray of wine glasses, saw them, hesitated, and then deliberately turned his face to the wall as they passed, the way a servant turns his face from a body being carried out of a house. He had canceled it. He had stood on the dais and canceled it. And the worst of it, the worst, most secret, most terrible of it, was that some part of her, deep beneath the borrowed dress and the careful 3 years of being small, was singing. The carriage ride back to Half Moon Street was the longest 20 minutes of Marisette's life. Her aunt did not speak. She sat very straight on the seat opposite, hands folded, face turned toward the window, and the silence was the silence of a woman composing, in her head, the letter she would write to Marisette's uncle in the morning. Marisette knew the letter would be short. Her aunt's letters of disaster were always short. "We can no longer keep her in town. Send a carriage. Aunt, do not speak to me until we are inside the house." Inside, Her aunt walked past the parlor and up the stairs to her own bedchamber and shut the door. Marisette stood in the entrance hall with her cloak still on her shoulders and listened to the long case clock mark out the seconds of a night she did not understand. A sleepy housemaid emerged from the back stairs, saw her, curtsied, and fled. She went up to her room. She did not undress. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed in the small back chamber she had been given, folded her hands in her lap, and waited for whatever was coming, because something was coming. She could feel it the way one feels a storm 3 counties off. It came at 2:15 in the morning. A knock at the front door. Quiet, but not apologetic. The kind of knock a man gives when he has decided to wake a household and has prepared his apology in advance. Marisette opened her chamber door a crack. The sleepy housemaid was already going down the stairs. The heavy bolt was drawn back. A man's voice, low, even, polite, and Marisette could not make out the words but did not need to because she had heard that voice an hour ago in a candle-lit corridor at Caldermere House. Marisette, her aunt's voice from the floor below, sharp, awake. Come down. Now. She came down. He was standing in the hall just inside the door. He had not removed his greatcoat. There was snow in his hair. He looked, in the low light of the single lamp the housemaid had lit, like a man who had not slept and did not intend to. Your Grace, her aunt said. There was no warmth in it. It is 2:00 in the morning. I am aware. I would not be here at this hour without cause. Whatever your cause, it cannot be addressed at this hour. You will return in the morning, like a gentleman. Lady Pembroke, I came at this hour for one reason. To tell your niece, in your presence and her own, that what I did tonight in that ballroom was not done for her. Marisette, on the 3rd step from the bottom, did not move. Her aunt's mouth, which had been a thin, furious line, became a different, thin, furious line. Explain yourself, Your Grace. I broke an engagement tonight that should never have been entered into. I broke it because I have been a coward for 3 years and refused to be one for a 4th. I broke it because of myself and because of a word I said in a corridor at Briar Hollow when I was 24. And I am here at 2 in the morning to make certain that the version of this story, which is told tomorrow in every drawing room in London, is the correct one. And what version is that, Your Grace? That the Duke of Vesperton heard a piece of music tonight that reminded him he had been living someone else's life. That he had no understanding with Miss Holloway before tonight, and has none now. That he made his decision alone, and the responsibility for it is his entirely. That Miss Holloway is not to be named in any of it. That is a very pretty speech, Your Grace. It is a true one. Pretty and true are not always strangers. Her aunt looked at Marisette. Marisette, do you wish to hear what the Duke has to say to you, or shall I send him from this house? I will hear him. Then you will hear him in the parlor, with the door open, and I will be in the chair by the fire, and you will sit on the settee, and the Duke will stand. Is that understood, Your Grace? Entirely, Lady Pembroke. They went into the parlor. The fire had not been built up since evening. The room was cold. Her aunt took the chair by the dead fire. Marisette sat on the settee. Cassien Ardennes stood near the door, where his height did not loom over either of them. When he spoke to the cold fire. I was 24, he said, the night I heard you sing at Briar Hollow. Your brother was alive. Your father was at the table. Your brother said, Marisette will sing for us. Will you not, Marisette? And you did. And I stood at the back of the room near the doors because I did not trust myself to stand any nearer. When you finished, I went out into the corridor, and you came out a quarter of an hour later because someone had told you a guest was unwell. and I told you that your singing was a useful accomplishment for a young woman of your station." He paused. "The truth is that I had been engaged within the month, by my father's hand, to Lady Henrietta Crewe. The truth is that I knew, standing in that corridor, that if I told you what I actually thought of your singing, I would not be able to stand in front of an altar with a woman who was not you. So I called it useful, and I left Briar Hollow the next morning, and I did not see you again until tonight." Marisette had not realized she was crying until a tear struck the back of her hand. "My father died 18 months ago. The engagement did not. He had bound it to the entail in ways my solicitors are still untangling. I told myself I would honor it, because he had wished it. I told myself a great many things. And then tonight, a girl in a borrowed dress walked across a ballroom and opened a harpsichord and sang, and I understood, in the time it took her to finish 3 verses, that I was about to swear a lie at an altar, before God and a great many witnesses, and I could not do it." He stopped. Marisette could not look up. "I am not here to ask anything of you. The scandal that breaks tomorrow will be the largest of this winter, and the kindest thing I can do for you is to stay clear of you while it runs its course. I came tonight because I needed you to know, before you read the papers in the morning, why I did what I did." Her aunt said quietly, "Your Grace, I think she understands." "Yes. I think you should go." He bowed to Marisette, not to her aunt. He turned and went out, and Marisette heard the heavy bolt drawn back and the door close and the bolt drawn home again, and she sat on the settee and could not move. Her aunt rose and crossed to her and took her hand. "Oh, child, what a terrible thing to have done to you." He apologized. "Yes. And tomorrow morning, every newspaper in London will print a different version of what he apologized for. And by Tuesday, there will not be a drawing room in this city that will receive you. And by Friday, there will not be one in England. He has apologized, and he has ruined you, and he has done both in the same night." Marisette could not answer. "We leave for Yorkshire at first light," her aunt said. "Pack what you can carry. The rest will be sent." The long case clock struck 3. Somewhere out in the dark, the first edition of tomorrow's papers was being set in lead, and her name, the name he had been so careful not to say, was already finding its way onto every page that mattered. Yorkshire, in late December, was a country of low gray skies and fields the color of old iron, and Marisette Holloway, 3 weeks into her exile, had begun to suspect that her uncle's house at Larkspur Hollow had been built specifically to outlast hope. She rose at 7. She breakfasted with her uncle at past in the cold dining room where the silver had not been polished since Michaelmas. She read aloud to him in the long mornings. She walked in the afternoons along the meadow path until the wet seeped through her half-boots. She sat with her aunt in the evenings. She did not sing. She did not sing because she had given her word, and the word was the only currency she had left. "You will not sing in this house," her uncle had said the first morning, not unkindly. "Not in any house, not in any village church, not where a window is open. The papers have stopped printing your name only because you have given them nothing fresh to print. We will keep it that way." "Yes, uncle." She had said, "Yes, uncle," a great many times in 3 weeks. The phrase had worn a groove in her throat. The papers had been worse than even her aunt had predicted. The Morning Chronicle had been almost decent. The Post had been worse. The Examiner had been worst of all. A voice in the alcove, the Examiner, had titled its piece. 3 paragraphs of insinuation and 1 paragraph of facts, and a final sentence Marisette had read 4 times before her aunt had taken the paper from her hand. Whatever the truth of the matter, Miss H. of B.H. shall not soon be forgiven by the lady whose announcement her music interrupted. Marisette did not know what was in this morning's papers. She did not ask. The not knowing had become, in a strange, quiet way, the worst part of it. On the 23rd day of her exile, in the middle of a slow gray afternoon, a carriage came up the drive. She saw it from the window of the morning room, where she had been mending a hem. She knew it was not a local carriage, because no carriage in the parish had 4 horses, and she stood at the window with the needle in her hand and watched it stop in front of the house. And she thought, with a calm that surprised her, "He has come." He had not. A woman descended. She was perhaps 35, dressed in black and dove-gray traveling clothes, and she carried herself with the kind of straight-spined exhaustion Marisette associated with women who had recently lost someone and had not yet been permitted to stop being useful. A maid came up. "Master says you are to come down. Lady Henrietta Crewe, miss." Marisette set the mending on the chair. She walked down the stairs at the pace one walks toward a tooth drawer. In the parlor, her uncle stood with his back to the fire. Her aunt sat in the chair beside the window, with her hands folded so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Lady Henrietta Crewe sat on the settee in her travel clothes, hat still pinned, gloves still on. Marisette curtsied. "Lady Henrietta. Miss Holloway, will you sit?" "I will not stay long. I have come a great distance, and will go a great distance back tonight. I have not come on the Duke of Vesperton's behalf. He does not know I am here. He would forbid it if he did. I have come on my own account because in 3 weeks I have heard a great many opinions about the woman who sang at the Caldermere ball, and I find I have been unable to form one of my own without sitting in a room with you. Yes, my lady. Look at me, Miss Holloway. I will not bite." Marisette looked at her. Lady Henrietta Crewe was not what she had expected. She had expected someone beautiful, and Lady Henrietta was not beautiful. She had a long, plain, capable face, and very clear gray eyes, and the faint vertical line between her brows that women acquire who have spent 20 years being the responsible one in a household. She looked like a woman who had been doing arithmetic for 3 weeks and had arrived, at last, at a sum. "Did you know, before that night, that the Duke intended to break our engagement?" "No, my lady." "Had you any understanding with him? Any private correspondence?" "No, my lady." "Then why did you sing?" Marisette opened her mouth to say, "I do not know," which had been her honest answer for 3 weeks running. She did not say it. She looked at the long, plain, capable face on the settee opposite her and understood that she owed this woman, of all people in England, a more honest answer, because a young woman in apricot silk asked me if I would sing, and I told her I did not sing in public anymore, and she asked me why, and I could not bear my own answer. Lady Henrietta looked at her a long moment. "Yes, that will do." "My lady?" "That is the answer I came for. I have heard a great many other answers in the last 3 weeks. That you are a fortune hunter, which would be impressive given that you have no fortune to hunt with. That you are a former mistress, which would require the Duke to have kept a mistress, and the Duke has not kept a mistress in the 3 years I have known him. That you are calculating, that you are a hysteric, that you are a fool." I had begun to think one of those answers might be true, because if one were true, I might be permitted to be angry, and I have very much wanted to be permitted to be angry. She paused. "You have just denied me that permission. I came up here to see if I could be angry with you. I find I cannot. You are a girl who sang 1 verse too many because a stranger in apricot silk spoke kindly to her, and that is a sin, but not the sin I needed it to be. My lady, I am. Don't apologize. I have not earned it, and you have not. I will say one thing, and then I will go. He did not love me, Miss Holloway. I knew he did not love me. I had known it for 3 years, and decided in my particular way that I did not require him to. I have spent the last 3 weeks understanding that what I was prepared to give him was a kind of slow imprisonment that he could not survive, and that he understood this before I did, and that the violence with which he ended it was, in the end, the kindest version of what he could have done. I will not forgive him for the manner of it. I have, I think, forgiven him for the fact of it. The room was very quiet. I came here, Miss Holloway, to forgive you in person for a thing you have not done. I came because I did not wish to spend the next 20 years of my life as a woman who blamed a girl in a borrowed dress for a marriage I had already lost. I will say in every drawing room that will admit me that I have met you and find no fault in you. I will not lie. I will not say I am your friend. I will say only that the version of you in the Examiner and the Post is a fiction. She rose. Lady Pembroke, Mr. Holloway, thank you for receiving me on no notice. Lady Henrietta, Marisette said. She paused with one gloved hand on the back of the settee. Why? Why what, Miss Holloway? Why have you done this? The vertical line between her brows deepened, then smoothed. Because I am 35 years old, and I will be 36 in March, and I have spent 15 years being patient and capable and exact, and I have not had 3 weeks like the last 3 since I was 19, and I have decided, on the road north, that I will not waste what they have cost me by becoming, in their wake, a smaller woman than I was before. That is why. Good day, Miss Holloway. She went. The carriage was gone within the quarter hour. Marisette stood in the parlor where Lady Henrietta had stood, and her aunt said quietly, I do not believe I have ever, in my entire life, met a woman like that. And Marisette only nodded. That night, for the first time in 3 weeks, she did not lie awake. She slept hard. She woke at dawn to the postboy on the gravel outside, the maid bringing up the bundle, and her aunt in the hall below, opening the Morning Chronicle and going very still. Marisette, her aunt called up the stairs. Come down. There has been a development. The development, as it turned out, was not in the Morning Chronicle. The Chronicle contained nothing at all about the Caldermere business, which by itself was news. The development was in the Post, which her aunt had also been sent. Read it, her aunt said. Her voice was odd, not angry, not even alarmed. The voice of a woman who has taken a step expecting a stair and found floor instead. Read it aloud, Marisette. Marisette took the paper. The column was on the second page. The headline was small, and the type was tight, and her hands were not quite steady. A correction, she read, and an inconvenience to those who have been so vigorously selling the contrary tale these past 3 weeks. We have it on the authority of Lady Henrietta Crewe herself, who returned to London late last evening from a private journey of some distance, that the young lady whose music was the occasion of the Duke of Vesperton's announcement is no acquaintance of His Grace, no party to his decision, and no proper subject of the speculations to which she has been subjected. Lady Henrietta has conveyed to this paper, over her own signature, that the responsibility for the events of that evening lies entirely with His Grace, that Miss H. is in every respect a young woman of unblemished character, and that any further attempt by this or any other journal to suggest otherwise will be met with the full weight of her family's not inconsiderable patience for litigation. Marisette set the paper down. Her aunt made a sound that was not quite a laugh. She wrote it last night, her aunt said, from the inn at Doncaster. She must have stopped to write that letter before she had even finished her own journey home. Yes. She has spent her own reputation to spare yours. Every paper will carry it by tomorrow. Lady Henrietta Crewe is the only person in England in a position to settle this question, and she has settled it in your favor. I understand exactly what it cost her, Aunt. That is why I do not know what to say." Her aunt looked at her over the rim of her teacup. "I think we may need to revise our plans for the spring." The next 2 weeks were strange. Letters began to arrive. Not many. 3 or 4 a week. The first was from Lady Caldermere herself, brief and stiff. The second was from the Dowager, who had wept into the lace handkerchief at the ball. The third was from the young woman in apricot silk, Beatrix, who had heard her sing through her sister, and was 4 pages long, and contained 2 pressed flowers and a postscript in different ink. I do not know if my asking you to sing was the best thing I have done in my life or the worst, and I shall not know until I am very old. But I wanted you to know that I am sorry for whichever it turns out to have been. There was no letter from him. She had not expected one. He had said in the parlor at Half Moon Street that the kindest thing he could do for her was to stay clear of her while the scandal ran its course, and he was, evidently, a man who said what he meant. She did not know whether to be grateful or to hate him for it. She tried being grateful. She found she preferred hating him. Hating him was warmer. On the 10th day after Lady Henrietta's correction, a 4th letter arrived in the Morning Post, and her uncle, who had been quietly and steadily reading the post for 3 weeks before passing it to anyone else, came into the morning room with it in his hand, and a look on his face Marisette had not seen before. "This is for you. It is unsigned. The hand is not one I recognize. It came by special carrier. I do not like it. I am giving it to you because you are not a child, and I will not begin opening your correspondence at this stage of your life. Read it in this room, with me here, and then we will speak." She broke the seal. The hand was educated, masculine, and careful. "Miss Holloway, you will not know my name and I will not give it. I am writing on behalf of a person who has reason to wish well to a friend of yours, and who has reason to wish that friend's recent decisions to be reconsidered before it is too late. Your friend has, in the last 3 weeks, taken steps that cannot be entirely undone, but might yet be ameliorated by a private understanding between the parties most affected. The arrangements concern the entail. They concern certain properties which were promised, in a contract that no longer exists, to a family which has now been publicly humiliated. One word from you, conveyed to your friend, at this delicate moment, would settle the matter in his favor and yours. Burn this letter. I trust to your discretion as a lady. A second letter will follow with particulars, should this one find a willing reader." She read it twice. Her uncle, watching her face, said, "Well?" "It is a blackmail, the beginning of one. Someone wants me to write to the Duke. They will provide the words. They want my hand on a letter in his possession that they can later produce. Burn it. Wait." She read it a 3rd time. It was very well done. The phrasing was careful. The implied threat was so well dressed in concern for your friend that one could almost mistake it on a first reading for an act of kindness. The instruction to burn the letter was pure brilliance. A burnt letter could not be produced as evidence. A burnt letter could only be remembered, and a memory could be denied. She suspected she would never know whose hand had written it, but she could narrow the field of possible authors. Someone close enough to the Duke to know about the entail. Someone close enough to the Crews to know they were considering action. Someone with the kind of patience that had waited 3 full weeks for the scandal to settle into a shape that could be exploited. She could narrow it, in fact, to one. "Uncle, do you still keep the Court Almanac for last year in the library?" "I do." "May I have it?" "Why?" "I want to look at the membership of a certain board of trustees and the list of executors of a certain estate, and satisfy myself of a suspicion. I will explain when I have." He looked at her a long moment. Maricette. Yes, uncle. You have not, in 3 years, asked me for the court almanac. No, uncle. This is a different sort of morning, then. Yes, uncle. I think it may be. He rose and went out and came back with the court almanac in its red boards. Maricette spread it open on the breakfast table and found what she was looking for inside of 10 minutes. Well, her uncle said, his cousin, his father's sister's son. He is named in the almanac as the second executor of the Duke's late father's estate, jointly with the family's London solicitor, and he is named in the court listings as having sat last winter on a private committee with the Earl of Mossbridge, who is Lady Henrietta's father. He is the only person in England with access to both halves of the picture this letter draws. His cousin, whose name is on the entail, whose name will be on the entail until the Duke marries and produces a son, at which point his cousin's interest in the matter will be permanently extinguished. Ah, her uncle said. He sat down. Ah, good heavens. Yes. He wishes the Duke not to marry. He wishes the Duke not to marry me. He may not particularly mind whether the Duke marries another, provided it is not soon, and not a love match, and not one that produces a son inside of a year. But I am the candidate currently exercising his imagination. He has read the Duke's character better than the Duke has read his own. He understands, as I had not yet entirely understood myself, that the Duke means to come for me eventually, and that if I am not stopped from receiving him, I will not stop him. Her uncle was silent a long moment. And will you not stop him? No, uncle, I will not. I will not write the letter this man wants me to write. I will burn his letter, as he has asked, and I will say nothing of it to anyone but you, and you will say nothing of it to anyone but my aunt. But I will not stop the Duke when he comes. I will not pretend, uncle, that I have not been waiting for him to come. Her uncle looked at her a long time. You have changed in 3 weeks, child. I have not. I have only stopped pretending I had not changed 3 years ago. He nodded slowly. Burn the letter. We will wait. She burnt it that afternoon in the morning room fire. She watched it curl black at the edges and break apart into ash, and she thought, with a small, cold clarity she had not possessed at any prior moment in her life. Whoever you are, sir, you have made a mistake. I do not yet know what I am going to do with it, but you have given me a thing I did not have an hour ago, which is information, and I will use it. That night, for the first time since the harvest ball, she sang, quietly, in her own small back chamber, with the door shut and the window shut, and her face turned to the wall, just the first verse, just to remember she could. He came on the 17th day. She had begun to expect him in the way one expects the breaking of weather, without knowing the hour. She had developed a habit of glancing at the drive at certain hours, the late morning, when the post was already in, the long blue hour before dusk, when a traveler from the south might reasonably arrive. The household had begun, without anyone giving the order, to keep the front parlor warmer than the rest of the house, and the silver in the dining room better polished than it had been in years. He came at the long blue hour, a single carriage, no outriders. He had come, evidently, with a view to being seen by as few people as possible. The maid came up to Maricette's chamber. Master says you are to come to the front parlor, miss. There is a gentleman. He says you are to come down as you are. He says you have been waiting, and he will not insult you by sending up for a change of dress. Maricette put down the book she had not been reading. She smoothed her skirt, plain wool the color of slate, creased at the knees. She did not change. She came down. He was standing in the front parlor, facing the fire, his back to the door. Her uncle was in the chair by the window, with the court almanac closed on his knee. Her aunt was not in the room, which Maricette understood at once was deliberate. Her uncle had taken a position. The position was that this was a conversation between two people which he would witness, but not chaperone. "Your Grace," she said. He turned. He looked in the firelight like a man who had not slept in 17 days, which she suspected was approximately accurate. He was thinner than at the ball. He had not removed his greatcoat. He held his hat in his hand. "Miss Holloway." "Will you sit?" "No. Forgive me. If I sit, I shall lose the order of what I have come to say. You may stand." He drew one slow breath. "Your uncle has had a letter from me which arrived an hour before I did. I asked for a quarter of an hour with you in his presence, on his sufferance. He has granted it. He has not granted me anything beyond it. Yes, Your Grace. I have come to tell you 3 things. Will you let me say them?" "Yes." "The first. I have been in London for 15 days, fighting my late father's cousin in chambers at Lincoln's Inn over a clause of the entail he has been attempting to use to compel me into a second engagement. I have prevailed. The clause is dead. He has no further legal interest in whom I marry, and I have, this morning, instructed my solicitors to begin removing him from the executorship of my late father's estate. I tell you this because I believe, from a piece of news that reached me through Lady Henrietta last week, that you have already had occasion to suspect him, and I want you to know the suspicion was correct." "How did Lady Henrietta know?" "She did not tell me. She wrote to me 10 days ago, and asked, in a single sentence, whether I was aware that my cousin had been in correspondence with parties in Yorkshire. I was not. I made inquiries. I learnt enough in 3 days to begin proceedings. Yes. The second. My engagement to Lady Henrietta is, as of yesterday afternoon, formally and finally dissolved at law. The papers were signed in the offices of her father's solicitors at 3 o'clock. She did not speak. The third, he said. He stopped. Forgive me. The third is the hardest. Take your time. He smiled briefly, and it made him look, for an instant, like the 24-year-old man she had stood with in a corridor at Briar Hollow. The third is that I would like permission to write to you, from London, at intervals of my own choosing and yours. I am not asking to come north again until I am invited. I am not asking you for an understanding. I am asking, very simply, whether I may write to you, and whether you will, when it suits you, write back. Your Grace, I know what I am asking. I am asking for the smallest possible thing, because the smallest possible thing is what I have any right to ask for. I have ruined your winter and a piece of your reputation that no correction in any newspaper will ever entirely restore. And I have, in the last fortnight, dragged the rest of your family into a fight with a man my own father should have disinherited a decade ago. I do not ask you to forget it. I do not ask you to forgive it. I ask only whether I may write. And if I say yes, then I will write to you tomorrow. And if I say no, then I will not write to you tomorrow, and I will not, ever in my life, send a letter to this house that you have not asked to receive. I will not return north. I will not seek you in town. If we meet by accident in a drawing room in London 5 years from now, I will bow to you, and you will incline your head, and we will pass on. I want you to know what no means before you choose. I will not be a man who comes back. She looked at him a long moment. The fire snapped. Her uncle in the chair by the window did not move. Your Grace. Yes. I'm going to ask you a question. You may refuse to answer. Will you let me ask it? Yes. 3 years ago in the corridor at Briar Hollow, why did you choose that word? Not why you said something other than the truth. You explained that in my aunt's parlor 3 weeks ago. Why useful? He was silent a long time. Because my mother, he said at last, before she died, when I was 16, used to say of her own girlhood that singing had been her only useful accomplishment. She meant it lightly. It was a private joke between the two of us. I had not thought of it in the corridor at Briar Hollow until the moment I looked at you and understood I was about to lose my power of speech. I reached for the first word in my head, and the first word in my head was hers. I did not understand, until I had said it, that I had used it as a shield. I have understood since. Useful. It was the worst word I could have chosen, and the most honest one. My mother would have known what I meant by it. You could not have. I did not give you the means. She nodded slowly. Yes, Your Grace. You may write to me. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet, and he did not pretend they were not, and he did not turn his face away. Thank you. There are conditions. Name them. You will not write more than once a week. I will not always answer. You will not come north until I write and ask you to come, and I will not ask you until I have seen, in the post over weeks, the man who has written the letters, because I don't yet know whether the man writing from London is the same man standing in this parlor. Yes. You will not, ever again in your life, choose a word for me, because it is the safe word. You will choose the true one, or you will choose silence. There is no third option. Is that understood? Yes, Miss Holloway. Then you may write to me. He bowed. He did not approach her. He did not reach for her hand. Mr. Holloway, he said to her uncle, I have exceeded my quarter of an hour by perhaps 2 minutes. I beg your pardon. I will go. Your Grace, you may stay to dine. My wife has been instructing the household for the better part of an hour. It would inconvenience her considerably if you left. The Duke of Vesperton looked at her uncle a long moment, and at Marysette for longer, and he laughed. It was a low, broken, astonished laugh, and Marysette had never heard him laugh in her life, and she discovered the sound of it did something to her chest she was not prepared for. He stayed to dine. He left at 3 minutes before 10. She stood at her chamber window and watched his carriage go down the drive into the dark, and then she sat down at the writing table where she had not written a letter in 3 years, and she trimmed a pen, and she wrote, Your Grace, I am writing first because I do not wish to wait until tomorrow to discover whether you mean what you have said. I did not promise in the parlor to be patient. I did not promise to be kind. I did not promise to be small. I will not be any of those 3 things in this correspondence, and I want you to know it before the first of your letters arrives. I will, however, be honest. You may rely upon that. Write to me. M.H. She slept, for the first time in 3 years, with the window open a quarter of an inch, because she had decided, in the way one decides certain small things, at certain particular hours, that she was not, after all, afraid of being heard. The letters began on a Tuesday. The first arrived 4 days after he left Larkspur Hollow, by ordinary post, in an envelope that bore no crest and no return direction. Marysette did not open it until her uncle had gone out to the home farm, and her aunt had retired to write her own letters in the small parlor upstairs. She opened it, sitting on the window seat with her back to the door. Miss Holloway, I had thought, on the long road south, that I would write to you about London, about the chambers at Lincoln's Inn, and the slow disposal of my cousin's claims, about the conversation I had with Lady Henrietta's father, which was the most uncomfortable hour of my life, and which I survived only because the Earl of Mossbridge is, in private, a more reasonable man than his daughter has had cause to discover. I find, having sat at this desk for half an hour with a clean sheet of paper, that I do not wish to write to you about any of those things. Tonight, I want to tell you about a window. There is a window in the long gallery at Vesperton House, on the eastern side, which looks out over a piece of ground that was, when I was a boy, my mother's herb garden. She kept it badly. She knew nothing about herbs and planted them by the wrong calendar, and most of them died within a year. I, when I was 10, used to sit on the window seat of that long gallery and watch her fight the rosemary. She lost. The rosemary always won. She was killed in a carriage accident in the spring of my 16th year, and the gardeners kept the herb garden after her in the way she would have wanted, which is to say very badly, because none of us could bear to see it kept well. I came back to Vesperton House last week for the first time in 2 years. I sat on the window seat of the long gallery for a quarter of an hour before I went to bed. The herb garden is still very bad. The rosemary is still winning. I thought about you, which I have done every day of the last 3 years, and most particularly every day of the last 6 weeks. And I thought, for the first time, that I would like to bring you to that window. Not now. I'm not asking now. I am telling you what I sat on the window seat thinking, because I promised, in your uncle's parlor, that I would not choose the safe word any longer. Yours in patience and at length, C.A. She read it twice, put it back in its envelope, and placed the envelope in the drawer of the writing table on top of the unanswered letter from the girl in apricot silk. She sat at the writing table for perhaps 10 minutes, and then she trimmed her pen. Your Grace, the rosemary is correct. It is a Mediterranean plant, and your mother was attempting to keep it in Kent. The bay is hardier, and would have served her better in the same bed. I should like to see your garden, not now. I am not asking now either. I will tell you, since we are exchanging windows, about a window of my own. It is in the small back chamber where I am writing this letter. It looks out over a meadow, which in summer is a very ordinary meadow, and which in January resembles, in its particular shade of gray, the inside of a kettle that has not been scoured. I have looked out of this window every morning for 3 years. I have, in the last fortnight, opened it. Yours, M.H. She gave it to the maid for the post. Her aunt did not ask. The letters became a habit, and then a discipline. They arrived on Tuesdays, except for the 3rd, which had been delayed by snow on the Great North Road, and had reached her on a Wednesday, and had, for that reason, contained at the bottom a single line. Forgive the lateness. The snow is yours, not mine. She laughed at that line, alone in the morning room, and her aunt, passing in the corridor, heard her laugh and went on past the door with the small, still smile of a woman who has heard a sound she had begun to fear she would not hear in that house again. He wrote about Vesperton, about the steward he was learning to argue with, about a tenant farmer named Crief, who had told him that he was the worst Duke of Vesperton in living memory, and the best one the estate had had in 20 years, which was, he admitted, the most flattering insult he had ever received. He wrote about his sister, a married woman of 31 named Caroline, who lived in Northamptonshire, and who had, on hearing the news of the Caldermere ball, written him a letter so blistering he had carried it in his coat pocket for a week before he had been able to read it through. He wrote about Lady Henrietta, who was now in Bath, and was, he was relieved to say, not in mourning, but in something more nearly resembling an unembarrassed convalescence. She wrote about Yorkshire, about her uncle, whom she had begun to like more than she had at any point in her life, about a dog of her aunt's that had taken to sleeping in the morning room, about the deaf piano teacher who had come to call after Christmas and had sat in his chair with his head tilted and his hands folded while she played the small spinet for 3/4 of an hour, and had said, when she had finished, "Well, miss, you are not what you were 3 years ago. You are something else now. I cannot tell you what it is. I am too old to know what it is, but I think on the whole that I prefer it." She did not tell the Duke about the singing, exactly. She told him about the deaf piano teacher. She let him work the rest out for himself. It was March, the 3rd Tuesday of March, when the letter that came was different. She knew it was different before she opened it. The envelope was thicker. The seal was the ducal one, which he had never used in their correspondence. The maid bringing it up the stairs was treating it with the slight unconscious care servants used when they suspected a letter was carrying weather inside it. She opened it on the window seat. Miss Holloway, my sister Caroline arrived at Vesperton House yesterday morning, unannounced, with her husband and her elder daughter, and informed me before I had finished my coffee that she had taken a house in Harrogate for the month of April, that her younger child had been ill all winter and required country air, and that the country air of Yorkshire was the only known remedy. She has invited you. The invitation is enclosed. She has invited you, with your aunt as chaperone, to spend a fortnight in Harrogate, beginning the 2nd Monday of April. The invitation is from her, not from me. I will not be there. I will be in London the entire fortnight, attending to a piece of business which has been arranged in such a way as to make my absence from Harrogate unavoidable. My sister has told me, in fact, that if I attempt to be in Harrogate during her fortnight, she will lock me out personally. I tell you this because I do not want you to imagine, on opening her invitation, that it is a contrivance of mine. It is not. Yours, C.A. She took it into her aunt. Her aunt read both letters twice, set them on the small writing desk, and pinched the bridge of her nose. Well, yes. His sister. His sister. Marisette, you will go, and I will go with you. We will be respectable, we will be careful, and we will not, under any circumstance, set foot inside Vesperton House while we are in the county. Is that understood? Yes, Aunt. And you will pack the green wool and the lavender silk and the new walking dress your uncle paid for at Christmas, and you will not pack the dove silk you wore at the Caldermere ball, because I have burned it. You have what? I burned it in November, Marisette. I should have told you. I am telling you now. Marisette sat down on the small chair beside the writing desk and put her face in her hands and laughed, for the 2nd time in 3 months, until her ribs ached. The house in Harrogate was a tall, narrow stone house on a curving street near the Stray, and Caroline Brearley met them at the door personally. Within 40 minutes, she had Marisette's bonnet off, Marisette's aunt installed in a comfortable chair by the fire, and a tray of tea and seed cake on the table. I shall not pretend to you that I have brought you here for any reason except the one we all know. I have brought you here so I may form an opinion of you, and so my husband may, and so my elder daughter, who is 6 and a tyrant, may, which I warn you in advance will be the most stringent of the 3. I do prefer directness, Marisette's aunt said. Caroline, please. We are not in London. Caroline, then? And you, Eugenia. My niece is Marisette. We will all do better without titles for a fortnight. Excellent. Marisette, eat that piece of seed cake before my daughter comes down, because she will eat it if you do not, and I am attempting to civilize her by means of small, daily disappointments. The fortnight was the strangest 2 weeks of Marisette's life. Caroline did not court her on her brother's behalf. She did not, in fact, mention her brother for the first 3 days. The passing references were not flattering. She mentioned, on the 2nd afternoon, that her brother had been an insufferable child and an insufferable boy, and was only now, at the advanced age of 27, in any danger of becoming bearable. On the 4th day, Caroline took Marisette for a long walk on the moor above the town, with the elder daughter, Tibby, running ahead with a stick. My brother has not been a happy person at any point in his adult life. He was a happy boy. I had begun to believe he would not survive the dukedom in any meaningful sense, that he would do the work and live the life and die at 65 of a chest cold, and not, in the entire course of it, have been once present in his own existence. I have been writing to him every month for 3 years, asking him to break the engagement to Henrietta, because Henrietta is one of my dearest friends, and deserved better than to be married to a man who could not love her. Then in December, he broke it on the strength of 3 minutes of music, sung by a young woman to whom he had said, 3 years ago, the wrong word. Yes. I do not know yet whether I approve of you. I will tell you when I have decided. What I will tell you now is that I approve of what you have done to him. On the 8th day, Caroline announced over breakfast that she had decided. I approve of her. I shall write to my brother this afternoon to tell him so, with the condition that he is not to mention me in a single letter to her for the next 3 weeks, on pain of my coming to Vesperton House and removing his furniture. Caroline, I am not entirely sure that You do not have to be sure of anything for another 6 months. Eugenia, am I pressing her? You are not pressing her. You are removing every available alternative to the only conclusion you find acceptable, which is a different operation, but produces a similar effect. Eugenia, you are a wicked woman, and I love you. Marisette, eat your egg. She ate the egg. The trouble came on the 11th day. Marisette had walked into town in the early afternoon with Tibby and her nursemaid on an errand to the pastry cook's, and they had taken the long way back along the stray. She did not notice until they were almost at the door of the house in the curving street that the man standing on the opposite pavement had been standing there for some minutes. He was middle-aged, perhaps 50, in a brown traveling coat and a high-crowned hat. He was not looking at Marisette. He was looking at the door of the house. As they came up the street, he turned, very deliberately, so that his face was visible to her, and he raised his hat. She did not know him. She knew, the moment he raised his hat, that he wanted her to know him. She walked past. She got Tibby into the house and went directly to the small parlor at the back, where she knew Caroline would be. Caroline, there is a man in a brown coat in the street outside. He does not know me, but he wants to be seen by me. I think he is your cousin's man. Caroline went very still. Describe him. She described him. Caroline crossed to the window and looked out at an angle that did not put her face against the glass. Yes, I have seen him before. He was at my father's funeral. He is one of Audley's clerks. Audley is the cousin. Marisette, sit down. They thought for the better part of an hour. He cannot enter the house, Caroline said. He has no grounds. He cannot accost you in the street. The street is too public. He's here to be seen. He wants you to know he has located you. He is attempting to do at one remove what his master has not been able to do at law. He wants me to be afraid. He wants you to be afraid enough to refuse my brother. Caroline, I would like to write to your brother, truthfully, in detail. I told him in February that if I ever found myself in correspondence with anyone in London about him, I would tell him in the next letter. It is yours for as long as you need it. She wrote the letter in a quarter of an hour. She gave it to Caroline's footman to be sent express. The reply came back the morning after, by special carrier, and the carrier's livery was unfamiliar to Caroline, who frowned at it from the window and said, "That is one of my late father's old liveries. My brother had it changed when he came into the title. He has put a man in the old colors on the road specifically to carry this letter, because the old livery is faster on the Great North Road. The old colors were known to every coaching inn between Highgate and York, and are still given fresh horses on the strength of their appearance. He has shaved a full 8 hours off the journey by sending it in his father's colors. Open it." She opened it. M. Audley's man in the street is the third such person we have placed in the last fortnight. The others were in London and in Bath, in the latter case attempting to approach Lady Henrietta, who recognized him from across an assembly room and had him removed within a quarter of an hour. I had not told you about the others because I had hoped, foolishly, to have ended the business before it reached you. I underestimated him. I will not underestimate him again. You are not to leave the house unaccompanied for the remainder of your stay. You are not to receive any letter that has not been opened first by Caroline or by your aunt. You are not to engage with the man in the brown coat or any successor. I'm leaving London tonight. I will be in Harrogate before the second post on Friday. I will be at the Granby. I have decided, after 3 months of writing to you about windows and gardens, that there is one further thing I should like to say to you in person. Yours, C. Marissette set the letter down. He's coming on Friday. Yes, Caroline said. I had hoped he would. You said you would lock him out of the house if he came. I said I would lock him out in April. It is now May. It is the last week of April. Marissette, it is Wednesday. Friday is May. Marissette stared at her. You arranged this. I did not arrange Audley. Audley arranged Audley. I have taken advantage of him. There is a difference, a small one, but a real one. Now, let us go and tell your aunt that we shall be needing the green wool aired by Friday afternoon, because you will be wearing it when you walk to the Granby Hotel under my chaperonage to meet a man who is going to ask you a question that he has been preparing for, by my count, 4 months. She walked to the Granby Hotel on the Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock, with Caroline on one side of her and her aunt on the other, in the green wool. Harrogate in the first week of May was beginning to fill with people who had come for the season, and Caroline nodded to those they passed with the brisk, impersonal warmth of a woman who is doing nothing in particular and has nothing to hide. Marissette did not see the man in the brown coat. She suspected he had been told to be somewhere else, by means she did not entirely want to know. The Granby was a large, prosperous stone building near the Stray. Caroline asked at the desk for the Duke of Vesperton. His Grace is in the small private parlor on the first floor, ma'am. He's expecting you. He was. He rose when they entered. He had been sitting in the chair by the window, with a book closed in his lap, and a cold cup of coffee on the small table beside him, and Marissette understood at one glance that he had been sitting in that chair for the better part of an hour, and had not opened the book once. Caroline. Brother. Lady Pembroke. Your Grace. Miss Holloway. Your Grace. I have requested, he said, that the parlor next door be set for tea, with the door between the 2 rooms open at all times. I had thought we might speak in this room with the door open, and they would be in the next, and we would all hear one another, and there would be no question afterwards of impropriety. Will that do? That will do, her aunt said. Caroline nodded. They went, the 2 of them, into the next room, and Marissette and the Duke remained, and the door between them stood open, and the late afternoon light through the parlor window was the soft yellow of a Yorkshire May. Sit. I am not going to stand and lecture at you. I have had 4 months of standing and lecturing, and I have decided I do not care for it. She sat. He sat in the chair opposite, not the one by the window. He did not pick up the book. Audley is finished. The proceedings to remove him from the executorship were concluded yesterday morning. He is lost. He has agreed, in writing, to withdraw all communication, direct and indirect, with you and with Caroline and with Lady Henrietta, in exchange for my agreement not to pursue the criminal charges that were available to me on the strength of the letter you burned in January. He will not trouble you again. Yes, that is the small thing. I wanted it out of the way before the larger one. He drew breath. I came to Harrogate because I had decided in March, sitting at my desk in London the night I sent you the letter about the Long Gallery, that I would not ask you the question I have wanted to ask you for 4 months in a letter. I would not ask it through Caroline. I would come in person to whatever room you happen to be in, and I would ask it with my own face and my own voice, and you would answer it with yours, and whatever the answer was would be the answer. Yes, Marisette. Yes, I love you. She did not speak. I have loved you since I was 24. I told you that in January. I have loved you the entire intervening 3 years, badly, at a distance, in silence. I have loved you in the last 4 months with letters, at a slightly improved range. I have loved you this past fortnight from London, while you walked on the moor with my sister and my niece, which my sister has reported to me in such detail that I have at least 4 separate evenings' worth of mental images of you, in places I have never myself been, all of which I will keep until I am very old. There is no version of my life that does not begin from that fact. He stopped. I am not asking you for an answer to that. I have not earned an answer. I am stating it because the question I am about to ask you is not a question that can be asked except by a man who has stated it first. Will you marry me, Marisette? She closed her eyes. She opened them. She did not, this time, look away. Yes. He went very still. Yes, she said again. But. There is a but, and I will say it now, because if I say it now, you will have time to decide whether you can live with it before we walk back to Caroline's house. Yes. I will not be a duchess who is small. I will not be a duchess who is invisible. I will not give up my voice. I will not stop singing in public. I will sing at every supper to which we are invited, if the host will have me. And I will sing at the ones where we are the host, whether the guests will have me or not. And I will not, ever again in my life, accept the proposition that singing is a useful accomplishment for a young woman of my station. It is the central accomplishment of my life, and I will not be married to a man who treats it as anything else. Yes. Will you live with it? I will live with it. I will protect it. I will, on every occasion on which it is required, stand in a room and inform any person who has misjudged it of his error, in person, at length, and at whatever cost. I have been preparing to do so for 3 years. I would consider it the honor of my life. She nodded. Her hands were shaking. She put them in her lap. There is one further condition. Yes. You will tell your sister this evening that I have accepted. And you will tell her in person. And you will sit down in her drawing room. And you will let her say to you whatever she has been waiting to say to you on the subject of the last 3 years. And you will not interrupt her. And you will not defend yourself. And you will not leave the room until she has finished. Marisette, that is not a condition. That is a sentence. It is both, Your Grace. He laughed. It was the second time she had heard him laugh in her life. I accept. I accept all of it. I will go this evening. I will sit in her drawing room. I will not interrupt. I will probably not survive it. I accept. He did not kiss her. He did not stand. He did not even reach for her hand. He sat in the chair opposite hers, and the late afternoon light moved by inches across the floor between them. And after a moment he said, I will write to your uncle tonight. I should like to come north on Monday. I should like to ask him in person. He will say yes. He has been waiting for you to ask him for 2 months. Has he? Yes. I had not understood. You were not supposed to. He smiled. She rose. He rose. They walked back into the next room, where Caroline and Marisette's aunt were sitting on either side of a tea table that had not been touched, and Caroline looked up and said, Well? Well, her brother said, I am to come to your drawing room this evening. and I am to listen to whatever you have to say to me on the subject of the last 3 years, without interrupting, without defending myself, and without leaving until you have finished. I had thought I might come at 6. Caroline put her teacup down very carefully. 6. 6 will do nicely. Eugenia, my dear, will you and Marisette stay to dine? I shall be conducting an interview at 6, but it will be over by 7:30, and I should like company at table afterward. I think I shall need it. The wedding was small. It was held at the parish church near Larkspur Hollow in late September on a clear, cold morning. Marisette wore a cream silk that her aunt had chosen and that her uncle had paid for, and that fit her, for the first time in her life, exactly. Caroline stood beside her. Tibby, now 7, scattered rose petals with the air of a woman discharging an office of state. The Earl of Mossbridge attended, with his wife. Lady Henrietta did not, but sent a letter that the Duke read in the vestry before the ceremony and folded into the inner pocket of his coat. Audley was not invited. He had retired in the spring to a small estate in Worcestershire and had not been seen in London since. Beatrix Calverley attended. She had been, since April, in steady correspondence with Marisette that had moved by stages from apology to friendship. She wept through the service. So did the dowager, who had wept at the Caldermere ball. The deaf piano teacher attended. He played the small organ. He did not, this time, hear what was played, but he played it anyway. And Marisette, walking down the aisle on her uncle's arm, looked at his bent gray head at the keyboard and did not weep, but came nearer to it than she had expected. Her uncle gave her away. He took her hand at the chancel step and placed it in the Duke's, and said very quietly, only to the Duke, "If you make her unhappy, I will not come to London to confront you. I will write to your sister, and I will leave the rest to her." "Entirely, sir," the Duke said. There was no announcement in any newspaper. The only notice that appeared in the Morning Chronicle was a single line on the second page. On the 24th instant, at the parish church of Saint in the West Riding, the Duke of Vesperton to Miss M. Holloway of the same county. Lady Henrietta Crewe married the following spring a barrister of quiet ability and unfashionable kindness named Henry Felbridge. They were not a brilliant match. They were, by every report, a happy one. Audley died of a chest complaint in the 3rd winter of the marriage. He was not mourned. The Duke and Duchess lived chiefly at Vesperton House, with visits to Curzon Street during the season, and in the 2nd year of the marriage, they began to receive on Tuesdays a small group of friends who came from music. By the 4th season, the Tuesdays at Vesperton were spoken of in certain circles as the only musical evenings in London at which the principal singer was the hostess. In the autumn of the 3rd year, on a clear, cold morning that smelled of wet leaves, Marisette stood at the window of the long gallery at Vesperton House, looking out at a piece of ground that was, if not yet, a herb garden, at least a piece of turned earth, in which small, unpromising green things had been planted that spring. She had planted them herself. By what she suspected was the wrong calendar. The Duke came up behind her. He stood at the window beside her and looked at the same piece of turned earth. "It will not survive," he said. "Probably not. You will plant it again next year." "I will plant it again every year of my life." "Yes." "Cassian." "Yes." "Do you remember the first letter you wrote to me? About this window?" "Yes." "You said you would like to bring me to it?" "Yes." "You did not say what we would do once we were here?" "No." "I did not know." "I think we are doing it." He laughed softly, reached out and took her hand, and held it for a long time. She had sung once at a harvest ball, and a duke had cancelled his engagement that night, and the world had said it was a scandal, and the papers had said it was a ruin, and her aunt at the time had said, with finality, that it was a complete disaster. It had been all three. It had also been the beginning of her life.